Assalamu alaikum, welcome back. We're going to continue reading the book al-Ajwubah al-Jaliyah fil al-Ahkam al-Hanbaliya, or the clear answer in the Hanbali Rulings by a Shaykh Musa bin Issa al-Qaddoomi rahimahullah. This is going to be lesson 38, Rulings on Fasting, part 1, including the moon sighting and conditions for the obligation and validity of fasting. Let us begin. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Allahumma anfa'na bima 'allamtana wa 'allimna bima yanfa'una wa zidna ilman ya Rabbil Alameen. قال المؤلف رحمه الله نفع الله به وبعلومه وعلوم مشايخنا في الدارين آمين. Kitab al-Siyam, or the Book of Fasting. We are on page 109 of our Sheikh Khalid Shah translation. And just congratulations if you made it this far. We have finished the book of Tahara, purification, and Salah, or prayer, and this is probably about 80% of the book, so probably we'll have about 3 lessons here in the book of fasting, and we'll see how much longer it will take to finish the rest of the book, inshallah. Now, even before we begin to explain, something that could be beneficial to know is that the author, rahimahullah, he has put this book of fasting directly after the book of Salah or prayer, and I think virtually all of the Hanbali Fiqh books follow the book of prayer with the book of Zakah, and then fasting. So his order is a little bit unusual. There are reasons one can understand why you would maybe put the book of fasting here. I don't want to get into that, but I'm just raising this issue because as we've said before, Shaykh Musa al-Qaddoomi rahimahullah, although this book seems to be based on Daleel a-Talib, he does tend to change the order sometimes, and in this case he's changed the order of a whole book. So if you are reading this book with a supplementary book, like one of the explanations or commentaries of Daleel a-Talib, or even just the Matan, the core text of Daleel a-Talib, just make note that you will have to skip ahead to the book of fasting and then go back to the book of Zakah. So this is the section on the rulings of fasting, and the Shaykh rahimahullah, he says 84, what makes fasting of Ramadan wajib, or obligatory? And he says the sighting of the hilal, meaning the new crescent moon, makes fasting wajib. Hilal sighting for the beginning of Ramadan is established by the testimony of one upright and legally obligated person who sees the moon. This is to be cautious in worship, so not to miss a fast of Ramadan. The witness can be a slave or female. However, this will not suffice for other months except with 2 upright males. Now, when we hear the word fasting, maybe we just have this general idea of not eating food or drinking water. However, the technical definition of fasting is the abstinence or refraining. You could say a specific abstinence or refraining from a specific person during a specific time for specific things. Now, as I think you know, the months of the Hijri or Islamic calendar are based on lunar months. So we're talking about the cycle of the moon. And in general, any new month will be established by the sighting of the new moon. So of course, the establishment of Ramadan is based on the sighting of the moon, and this should be a visual sighting, meaning we don't rely on some type of a calendar projection. Now, a-Taghlabi mentions in the Sharh, that it is recommended that one reads a supplication upon sighting of this new moon, and that supplication goes as Allahu Akbar, Allahumma ahillahu alayna bil amni wal imani wal salamati wal islami wal tawfiqi lima tuhib wa tarda Rabbi wa Rabbuka Allah. Now, with regards to when the moon is sighted, who the sighting applies to, I believe that the Hanbali madhab has a bit of a middle position, meaning that there are some madhabs that they have a very local sighting, and then other madhabs rely on kind of a global sighting. So basically, the people of a balad can rely on this sighting. Maybe we can debate a little bit what a balad means, but I think in the contemporary setting, we can think of it as just as a country. So a sighting in a country should be valid for that country, and this more or less corresponds with the system that we see applied in the world today, and Allah knows best. And just to clarify, the ruling for the one who sees it is the same as the one who doesn't see it. I mean, it's not obligatory that everybody sees the new moon. I think that was maybe clear in what I've just said, but I mean, a-Taghlabi, he also mentions this point in his Sharh. So just to be crystal clear, the sighting of that person can apply for the whole country. Now, we do have a special ruling that we need to mention here. It wasn't mentioned by Shaykh al-Qaddoomi in al-Ajouba, but there is a special ruling related to the night of the 30th of Sha'ban. So the month of Sha'ban is the month before Ramadan, and if you recall what we've discussed previously, when we say the night of a specific day, like a Tuesday or Wednesday, whatever, in the Islamic timings or calendar, the night of a specific day, here we're talking about the 30th, it will start at the Maghrib time, and then it's followed by the day of the 30th. Okay? So, according to our madhab, on the night of the 30th of Sha'ban, if one cannot see the moon, for example, if there are clouds, or if there's smoke in the sky, one would then make the intention that it is Ramadan and that they will fast the following day. And this would be an intention that's based on possibility, not certainty. Now, this may be one of the unique positions in the Hanbali madhab, but this was the position of Al-Imam Ahmed and Al-Kharaki. He's selected this position as well as most of our sheikhs. and this was the position of Umar and his son, and Amr bin al-As, and Abi Huraira, and Anas, and Muawiyah, and Aisha, and Asma bint Abi Bakr radiyallahu anhum, and many of the tabi'een also had this position. What this basically means is that if then it becomes apparent that it is Ramadan, meaning there would be the appearance of the new moon that would establish that it is now Ramadan, then that fast would become valid. And according to this position, other things would also be performed. For example, that first night where we said we can't establish for certain if it's Ramadan, but there's the possibility. So the night of the 30th of Sha'ban, we would then, for example, pray a Taraweeh prayer. And the other rulings related to fasting would then also become applicable. So, for example, the expiation for one who would be having marital relations during the daytime, that would then have to be performed. And likewise for the person who was not obligated to fast and then the obligation came, meaning, for example, someone who was traveling and then became a resident, or a woman that had menstruation or postpartum bleeding and then that stopped. So in these cases, the obligation for fasting would come. However, this counting of the days or the months would only apply to these, we can say, acts of worship related to the fasting of the month of Ramadan. What this means is, for example, any other Sharia rulings or contracts, we can say, that will be based on counting the calendar would not come into effect until the actual Ramadan was established. So an example of this would be if someone was going to tell his wife, you are divorced on the 1st of Ramadan. So because Ramadan would not be established with certainty, that wouldn't come into effect. Likewise, maybe this is not really an applicable example, but if someone was freeing a slave and they were saying you're going to be free on the 1st of Ramadan, that would also not come into effect. Or maybe any other contract, like having to pay rent or make a payment on something, that would still have to be relied on the calendar that's based on certainty. And there is another way to establish the beginning of Ramadan. For some reason, I don't think I recall seeing it here in Daleel a-Talib, but Shaykhuna Dr. Mustafa, he's mentioned that the completion of the month of Sha'ban, or we should say the completion of 30 days of the month of Sha'ban, would also establish Ramadan. The reason being that all lunar months are either 29 or 30 days. So as long as that, as you can be sure of the beginning of Sha'ban, and then from that time you can count the 30 days, then you can be also certain that Ramadan has begun. So, as we said, the sighting of the new moon or crescent moon is established by the report of one upright and legally responsible Muslim. So the report should be from a Muslim, not a non-Muslim, someone who's legally responsible, so not from that of a young child, for example, and someone who's also morally upright, meaning at least externally, apparently morally upright. And it's also not a condition that the person be a male witness. This single witness can be a female, or it's also not necessary that they be a free person. It could also be a slave or servant. So this is maybe a special type of witnessing, and it is not necessarily applicable for other cases in the Sharia where we would need witnesses. It's also not necessary that some type of state authority is the one who's witnessing. Any upright, legally responsible Muslim can establish Ramadan with their sighting. And just to be clear, there's no need for more than one sighting for all the different rules related to Ramadan to be established. The sighting of one person that meets those conditions will establish all the rules of Ramadan. And this is a special rule. It does not apply for 4 months other than Ramadan. So other months would require the witnessing or the witness of 2 upright men. However, this single witness, there is some weakness compared to having 2 or more witnesses, and that would come into effect for establishing the end of Ramadan. So in the case, once again, where one cannot see the crescent moon due to, for example, there being clouds or some type, something obstructing your view of the sky, counting the 30 days would also be a way to establish the end of Ramadan. However, if only one person has witnessed the new moon, one single person, then that single witness is not good enough to establish the end of Ramadan by counting. Meaning, if you're going to count the 30 days to end Ramadan, you need to have started with 2 witnesses. Otherwise, if you have the single witness, you should have then the sighting to establish the end of Ramadan. So now we're going back to the book. Question 85. Which prerequisites of the fast of Ramadan make it wajib? And the author replies, 4 things make the fast of Ramadan wajib. A. Islam. B. Past the age of puberty. C. Being of sound mind. D. Being capable of fasting. So I think these are, inshallah, pretty straightforward. So obviously, al-Islam, the non-Muslim, will not have the fasting of Ramadan being obligatory upon him. Next, al-Bulugh, so having reached the age of a physical adulthood, or as the translator has said here, past the age of puberty. However, regarding this point, Shaykhana Dr. Mustafa, he did also mention that for the person who is tamayyiz, so that means they have some type of discernment, and the famous example I think we've mentioned many times is like they can tell a cow from a buffalo, and maybe we can make our own contemporary analogies. Maybe they can tell a Land Cruiser from a RAV4. But anyways, for that child who hasn't passed the age of puberty but they have discernment, fasting is permissible but not obligatory, and they will be rewarded inshallah. Okay, the third condition, al-aql, or being of sound mind. So that means not the for example, the crazy person, mentally insane person. And then finally, being capable of doing it. So it would not be obligatory upon someone who is sick and unable to do it. And we will maybe talk more about that and to define it. In addition to one being unable to fast due to sickness, also advanced old age could be another reason, or someone who has a chronic or permanent condition, some type of sickness or disease where they, as we want to emphasize, it's a permanent or chronic condition, so there's no hope of recovery. These categories of people would not be obligated to fast. However, instead of fasting, they would have to do some type of like a expiation, although that's not maybe exactly the correct word, but they would have to feed one poor person a mud, so that's like the 2 handfuls of burr or wheat, or half a sa', which would be 2 muds of something other than wheat. And each day would just be referring to each day of Ramadan that was not fasted, meaning it would have been obligatory upon them otherwise, but then was not fasted. In the case that one did have some type of permanent or chronic condition that somehow went away, they would not have to then make up the fasting. Like if someone was paralyzed and they couldn't go on Hajj, and someone made a Hajj on their behalf, and then they became better, or the paralysis ended, then that would still count for them, and they wouldn't have to make any qada or make up Hajj. The same principle would apply to fasting. So now let's go back to the book. The author, rahimahullah, he says, question 86, what are the prerequisites for a sound of the Ramadan fast? I think it can better be translated for the validity of the Ramadan fast. And the author replies, the prerequisites for the soundness of the Ramadan fast are 6. A, Islam. B, ceasing of menses. C, nifas, meaning its cessation. D, the age of discernment. E, being of sound mind. And F, to make the intention the night before the fast starts. And of that night, meaning up to the, as we call it, the true Fajr, or the second Fajr, adhan, for each day is wajib. Its fard, or obligatory, is to refrain from all nullifiers of the fast from the start of Fajr until the completion of sunset. So I think some of these are going to be straightforward. Once again, al-Islam, it's as we described it in the condition for the obligation. And then the cessation of bleeding, whether it would be menstrual bleeding or postpartum bleeding, al-hayd wa nifas, and then having discernment, which was, as we've previously mentioned when we were talking about the conditions for the obligation of fasting. And that means there is also an obligation upon the wali or the guardian of a child to order the child to fast once fasting has become obligatory upon them, and to punish them if they don't fast, just as with other acts of worship such as the prayer. That's why if you have children, it's a good idea to let them train when they're younger before fasting is obligatory upon themselves. So I've seen some children be able to take it up quite easily. It's harder for others. There could be a lot of also other reasons depending on the context and the environment they're in. But the point being that let them start before it's obligatory, and let them do like a quarter day and half day, and then work up even to a full day. That way, once it becomes obligatory, they're able to do it and they're getting used to do it, and that would probably avoid this type of a confrontation that we were already discussing here. And then regarding having sound mind, a-Taghlabi, or we can say this even in the matan of Daleel a-Talib, so al-Imam Mar'i al-Karmi, he mentions this scenario that if someone of sound mind made the intention to fast at night, and then they became mentally unwell or went into a coma for most of the day, and then they came back to their senses, they came back to their sound mind, and something of the day was left, they could continue fasting, and that fasting would be valid. I realize this scenario could maybe get further questions, so let's just not think about it too much and just focus on the point that one needs to be of sound mind for the fasting to be valid. Now, regarding the niyyah or the intention, as we said, it has to be in the nighttime, and here we're specifically talking about the fasting of Ramadan. When in the scenario that it was an obligatory fasting of Ramadan, so for that type of fasting, making the intention of the next day during the daytime would not be valid. And I'm just kind of differentiating this with, for example, the supererogatory fasting, which does not require that kind of intention, and were one to make that intention during the daytime and they had not done anything since the Fajr that would have invalidated the fast, they would be able to go on fasting for a supererogatory fasting. Likewise, to clarify, that intention needs to be done every day that one is fasting. So one does not make, for example, in the first night of Ramadan, a single intention, I'm going to fast all of Ramadan. No. Every day of fasting, one should make that intention until they know that the fasting is over, i.e., the month of Ramadan is concluding. And that intention to fast, since it is for a specific kind of fasting, which we've already now differentiated with, for example, the supererogatory fasting, it does require some specification. So one would want to make the intention to be something like, I will fast tomorrow for Ramadan, and other fasting that has an obligation would also require that. So for example, fasting a makeup fast, or one like a fast that one made an oath to fast, or a kafara, an expiation fast. This would all require that kind of a specific intention. Shaykhuna Dr. Mustafa, he's also clarified for us that this is, we can say, one way to do the intention. I mean, if one is like saying the intention, it should be according to the form that we've mentioned. However, the intention can also be established in other ways that don't require speaking. So, for example, if one is going to be eating the suhoor, or the pre-dawn meal at night, or any type of eating or drinking, even if we don't call it a meal, and they have that intention that they're doing this to fast the next day, then that would also be considered a valid type of intention. Meaning, he is eating this meal, this dinner, because he wants to fast, and having this type of intention while eating would differentiate eating this meal, whether we call it suhoor or the dinner, as opposed to any other type of meal or eating and drinking. Inshallah, that's clear. Now, there are some forms of fasting that are disliked. So Shaykhna Dr. Mustafa, he mentioned, for example, if one were to specify fasting every month of Rajab, this would be disliked, makruh. Likewise, if one were trying to specify fasting on Friday or Saturday, these are also days that it is generally disliked to fast, unless one has a specific reason, such as the fasting Yawm al-Arafah, for example. But if there is no specific reason that it has to be done, for example, on a Friday or Saturday, one should not do it, and if one does do it, it is makruh, disliked. Another time where it is disliked to fast is the so-called Yawm al-Shak, or the Day of Doubt, which is the end of the month of Sha'ban. And I think we'll see in the next dars that Al-Imam Mar'i al-Karmi specifies it as the 30th of Sha'ban, which is the month that is coming before the month of Ramadan. Now, one might be asking, how is this different than fasting that day due to it not the new moon not being sighted? The difference is that Yawm of Shak, or the Day of Doubt, this is the doubt of oneself. Meaning one is just thinking to himself, I'm not sure. Even though I didn't see the moon, and when we say didn't see it, it's like theoretically it could be seen. It's not a cloudy day, a foggy day, a smoky day. It's a day when normally the new moon can be sighted, but he's like, I just have a doubt, I just want to play it safe. This is different than when one can absolutely not see it. There is something physically obscuring the sighting of the moon. So if one is fasting the so-called Day of Doubt, once again, it's a day, last day of Shawwal, the day before Ramadan, one can theoretically see a new moon. There's nothing obscuring the view, but just for his own doubt, he's fasting. This is also makruh, disliked. So we're going to end this dars here. Inshallah, next time we will talk about those people who are excused from fasting, or rather we should say those people who it is permissible for them not to fast, and we will also look at the nullifiers of the fast. Please don't forget us, our scholars, and all of our Muslim brothers and sisters in your dua. May Allah accept our good deeds, and may He establish us to observe the next Ramadan, and may He accept all of our worship during that month. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een.